Are you ready to dive into a new dimension of gaming?
Right in my face!
Well, strap on your headsets, grab a fistful of batteries, and some headache medicine. We're heading into the Tiger R-Zone. Yeah, so I'm afraid I've fallen off the deep end here. What started as a rekindling of appreciation for those charming LCD handhelds has quickly escalated into a morbid fascination with Tiger's brief but insane foray into red-tinted virtual reality. Suddenly I'm in the possession of 3 R-Zone console variants and roughly 80% of the entire game library. Some of which seemingly don't even have recorded footage on YouTube, until now. And rather than piling on to the typical R-Zone discourse, labeling it as the worst console of all time, I feel that I must attempt to respectfully document the R-Zone's rightful place in gaming history, despite its obvious shortcomings and flaws. And if you know me, I embrace the jank, and I try to find fun in whatever's in front of me, even if I can barely see whatever's in front of me. We'll start off with looking at the Tiger R-Zone Headgear, first released in 1995 and marketed as an immersive virtual reality-like experience, not unlike its fellow red-tinted competing console, Nintendo's Virtual Boy, which also released in that year. And notably, the R-Zone would utilize cartridges, with a clear plastic window in the middle used to project the gameplay onto the mirrored surface of the headset's flip-down visor. Other than that, it basically uses the same technology as their LCD handhelds, using pre-drawn graphics in set positions and utilizing microcontrollers within the carts themselves, as the console itself has no memory or processing power. Now, this wasn't Tiger's first instance of a cart-based system, if you count QuizWiz, but certainly it could be seen as an attempt to compete with the more powerful handhelds on the market, especially with the game library pulling from Tiger's pool of licensed properties already established within their standalone LCD offerings. And pricing was quite competitive with other handheld consoles, retailing at $29.99 and usually including a pack-in game. The games are controlled with a controller connected to the headgear, sporting 4 face buttons, a D-pad, and 6 other buttons for system controls, and adjustment dials for contrast and volume. It almost seems more ergonomic than the usual Tiger handheld at first glance, but once you start using one, you'll quickly notice the oddly sharp and pretty uncomfortable design of the D-pad and face buttons. And weirdly, the controller has a non-functional cartridge slot, purely for storing an extra game. The controller also houses the compartment for the necessary 4 AAA batteries to power everything, secured with screws. The headset also has mono sound coming from one speaker, and to the dismay of anyone in the vicinity of someone playing the R-Zone, there is no headphone jack. Also to the dismay of whoever is actually using the R-Zone headset, the gameplay is really hard to see. Since the mirrored visor is transparent, you might need to orient yourself towards a blank wall or surface of some kind, perhaps close one of your eyes and angle the plastic just right. It's just kind of a disaster. Like, maybe this is a cool party trick at first, but actually playing this for more than a few minutes is a migraine waiting to happen. And as you can probably guess, this hardware was heavily criticized upon release for these very flaws, not to mention the quality of the games themselves, which we'll get into later. The R-Zone can't even really stack up against the Virtual Boy, although to be fair, it was a fraction of the cost.
From out of the R-Zone comes something so big.
It glows.
It's humongous. It's the R-Zone Super Screen, the biggest tabletop cartridge game screen you've ever seen.
A year later, Tiger would release a different way to play R-Zone games with the release of the Super Screen, a tabletop unit that utilizes rear projection via a larger angled screen measuring 6 inches and backlit with a maglite bulb, powered by 4 D batteries or an AC adapter, which is not included, and also retailing at $29.99. The marketing leaned heavily into how you could now play games in color, but really this was simply accomplished with additional background slides that slide over your R-Zone cartridge, and the gameplay graphics themselves are still just black, so it basically just acts like a slightly larger but blurrier LCD handheld. And it's really better suited for tabletop use, as opposed to holding it in your hands, due to its weight and button layout. All of the controller buttons are on the lower portion of the unit, giving it a mini arcade game kind of feel, and the D-pad has been replaced by 4 separate buttons that don't stab your thumbs. And despite a control knob for the focus on the bottom of the unit, I often found it a bit difficult to get a consistent sharp image out of the entire playfield. But it's fine enough to still be able to see the game, and there's at least a contrast knob to adjust the boldness of the graphics. And at least the gameplay is much easier to see than on the Headgear, and for our purposes today, it's a pretty solid way that we can capture game footage on real hardware.
Get ready to sweat! Hold on tight for a fuel-injected ripping ride on the first cartridge projection system. Open up the new R-Zone XPG Xtreme Projection Gaming. R-Zone cartridges ignite the rocket that accelerates you into the red unknown.
R-Zone hardware variants would continue in 1997 as well, with the release of the XPG Xtreme Pocket Game. Again utilizing R-Zone cartridges, but this time with a more standard handheld console form factor, using a pop-out mirrored surface to reflect that classic red and black gameplay. The gameplay area is quite small, but pretty clear. However, you do still need to angle this thing just right to reflect the image back towards you. And the D-pad and face buttons are finally normal. Dare I say, actually pretty good. The sound quality hasn't changed much, there's still no headphone jack, and on the power side, this goes back to taking 4 AAA batteries, again secured with screws. And unfortunately, those super screen color slides for the cartridges are not compatible here, but honestly this might be the best way to actually play R-Zone games. And it shows up quite decently on the camera, so we'll be using this for some of the video footage of the games as well. But for 1997, this thing definitely still doesn't compare to a Game Boy, Game Gear, or even an Atari Lynx, but it was at least one last stab at keeping the R-Zone dream alive. And one other variant I want to mention, which I unfortunately don't have, is the quite rare Data Zone, which is half R-Zone console and half personal organizer. Who is this for? Okay, fine, it's for sickos like me. Well, the R-Zone side runs the games on a flat screen with a backlight, and the other half is probably similar functionality to Tiger's DataPad device with a full keyboard. But man, these are hard to find and super expensive on eBay whenever someone happens to post one. Anyways, on to the games. I sadly don't have the entire library of titles, as some of them are super rare and hard to find, but we'll go through the 21 that I could scrounge together and at least mention the few that I don't have and relay any info that I can find. And we'll just go in alphabetical order here and start with Apollo 13, based on the blockbuster movie from 1995, which was in turn based on the events of the failed moon mission in 1970. And honestly, we might be starting out with the most confusing and unintuitive game of the bunch. This is one I really wish I had the manual for, but instead I tried to harvest some hints from other videos about the normal Tiger handheld version of this game, which is seemingly identical from what I can tell. Now this will be a recurring theme today, with Tiger reusing the game art and logic amongst different variants of their devices. But back to Apollo 13, it has 5 different missions with different unclear objectives for each, within a certain time limit. First off, you have to dock with the Lunar Exclusion Module. Then mission 2 is to steer the ship after an onboard explosion. And mission 3 has you steering the LEM through some space rocks. And missions 4 and 5 continue your perilous navigation back to Earth. I gotta say, at least there was some ambition here in the game design, with a variety of things to do in each stage, and it at least doesn't have another existing video game to live up to. It's just really kinda hard to figure it out without some guidance, especially considering all 4 face buttons have their own functions. But maybe if you like figuring out jank like this, you might have some fun here. Next up, we have Area 51, based on the hit arcade light gun game from '95, and our first game that I have a super screen background slide for. Yeah, this one's a lot more straightforward, and actually pretty fun, as you control a large crosshair across different zones of the screen and blast away at enemies before they deplete you of your supply of health. You also have a display of your ammo and have to frequently reload, and you can even get gun power-ups like the machine gun and shotgun, which I think can shoot faster or maybe do more damage, I'm not sure. And just like the arcade game, the power-up is lost once you get hit. There are also team members that pop up from time to time, and shooting them penalizes you and you lose health. So really, it's a pretty valiant effort of porting over Area 51's core mechanics. It even gives you accuracy ratings after a stage. Now, it has 6 levels in total, and it gets pretty frantic later, so this one ends up being way more fun than it should be. It's worth mentioning Area 51 also got a handheld variant that came with a little light gun. I haven't tried one of these out myself, but if my crippling R-Zone addiction doesn't bankrupt me, I might have to track one down. Next up, we have a couple of Batman games. And going in movie release order, let's look at Batman Forever, a multi-genre affair that starts out as a kind of beat-em-up, where you're punching bad guys, avoiding bullets, or jumping over wrecking balls. It also wants to have backing music the entire game. That little beeper is really trying its best. And if you can get to level 2, it's a driving stage where you steer around the Batmobile and shoot down enemy cars. I'm not totally sure how to beat this level yet, but I managed to rack up a bunch of points and then mysteriously died. A lot of guesswork in some of these games is another recurring theme if you don't have the manual handy. Apparently you have to press A or B to turn to the Bat boat at the end of this dock or you crash into the water, but I still couldn't figure out how to do it after a few tries. Now there are 5 stages in total, alternating between beat 'em up and vehicular stuff, including controlling the Batwing in level 4, until finally level 5 is a showdown with Two-Face and the Riddler, where you must destroy his new box, which is stealing away the citizens of Gotham. And there's also a follow-up here with Batman and Robin, although I'm honestly not sure if this one came out later or first or at the same time. It's kind of tricky to find actual release date info on these games. Now, this one seems a little more complex than Forever. You can even play as Batman or Robin. See the little ears? That's Batman. This also has alternating beat 'em up and vehicle stages, and at least the fighting levels give you the ability to move around the screen to various spots. You can kick, punch, and throw batarangs at enemies closing in on you before you run out of health and lives. It's a bit hectic and tricky in that you need to attack in pretty specific ways to hit enemies in certain spots. And the second stage is another driving level that I didn't really understand what was happening at all. And sadly, no manual available to help me out on this one. Either way, this one might have some potential. I might try to beat this one someday. Here's a fighting franchise that got its start on the PS1, Battle Arena Toshinden, which also found its way onto the R-Zone. It's seemingly one of the more common cartridges for the system, at least based on how many I've seen for sale online. It also happens to have a color slide with a rustic and faded mountain and plains backdrop. It's one of many 1v1 fighters for the R-Zone, and you can select from 6 different characters, 3 on each side, including AG, Kain, Duke, Sophia, Rungo, and Foe, and each have 2 special moves. It's always kind of neat to see how they manage to differentiate the characters with the small differences to the graphical elements. And you can kick, use your weapon, jump, and duck, and fight a series of opponents in best of 3 matches, and ultimately face off with Gaia for the 4th and final battle. Now, there isn't much to this one. It's kind of fun, but quite easy to finish, even if you don't figure out how to do the clunky special moves. Toshinden also saw a release as a standalone VRTX handheld, sporting a hologrammy background and fancy upper light to easier see the screen. It's too bad they didn't have any 2-player capability on this. Can you imagine linking 2 R-Zone headsets together?
Rolling
Rolling start! Oh wow, it sounds just like the real music if you sing along, right? Okay, so this is Daytona USA, based on Sega's arcade racer, and our first pure driving game to cover today. It has some kind of cool graphics actually, with some moving background elements like mountains and clouds, and even has a digitized engine startup and crashing noise. We've also got some starting options with 3 difficulty settings, automatic or manual transmission, and even a camera angle with a pseudo first-person view or a view from behind your Tiger branded car. This is basically what you would expect beyond that. Up accelerates, down brakes, and the face buttons change gears. There are also pit areas in case your car gets too busted up. An entire race is 10 laps or longer depending on the difficulty, and you have to hit checkpoints in time to keep going. And a first, second, or third place counts as a win. Now this one beeps a lot to indicate your speed, and a full race can take well over 10 minutes. So it's on the tedious side to actually finish a game, but at least the difficulty settings can provide whatever level of challenge you want. And we have a couple of games up next that I sadly don't have. First off with Football, a European exclusive, and maybe a pack-in only title. I can't find any info about the gameplay, so I just have to assume it's similar to Tiger's soccer handheld games, but who knows. I also don't have a copy of Independence Day, based on the blockbuster sci-fi action movie. This did get a North American release, along with a standard Tiger handheld and a handheld light gun game version. I did find some very old blurry footage online and can at least confirm that the gameplay is the same as the normal handheld. Getting back to games that I do have, and back to another racing title, we've got Indy 500, based on another Sega arcade racing game. And as you can guess, it's quite similar in feel to Daytona, but does have 3 modes to pick from: a championship race with 4 stages of 3 laps each, where you compete with several other drivers and must place in the top 10 to advance, not to mention getting first place in the final stage for the ultimate victory, which I honestly got first try. But hey, there are 2 other modes here: a preparation mode, which lets you practice each of the 4 tracks by yourself and try to improve your lap times, and there's a one-on-one dogfight mode, which sadly does not involve actual combat. It's instead a 1v1 race on one course, and it feels a bit more challenging. This one also has pit stops, which you'll need to figure out how to get into if your trouble light starts flashing, as in that state you can't go full speed anymore. Now driving in this one honestly feels a little more intuitive and fluid than Daytona, and it has a fancy rear view mirror too. Not bad. It seems to be a fairly common cartridge if you're trying to source one. And another one here I'm missing is a very rare pack-in only title with Judge Dredd. One of these actually sold on eBay recently for $800. But there's at least a Judge Dredd Tiger handheld, so without any footage out there, I'm guessing it's got similar gameplay to that one. Next up is Jurassic Park Lost World, a driving shoot-'em-up hybrid where you control either a Jeep or motorcycle through the park, blasting away hordes of dinosaurs coming at you from all sides, just like the movie, right? Now, there are 2 lanes to switch between if you're Nick in the Jeep, and 3 if you're Harding on the bike, and you have 3 directions you can shoot in. Sometimes it's a little unclear which direction you're shooting will actually work, but you might get the hang of it. I'm still not sure how to really deal with the Triceratops that smashes you from behind when you're in the Jeep, but the motorcycle can easily get out of the way. Either way, you at least can enjoy plenty of highly realistic gun sounds and dinosaur roars. This one is a pretty decent challenge, and it's kind of fun. And it has 3 difficulty modes. It's kind of an unsatisfying ending though. Unless I'm misunderstanding something, it just kind of stops and plays a little song. And for what might possibly be one of the most rare titles on the system, I sadly don't have Mask of Zorro, supposedly a pack-in only title in the UK, but also sold in the Netherlands. This also got a standalone Tiger handheld, which also seems to be quite hard to find. So there's not much info here, sadly. But if it's like the handheld, you probably move Zorro around a field and stab enemies. Now, a rare one I do have is Men in Black, another movie-licensed game taking the form of a multi-lane shooter. You can move left to right along the bottom in 5 different positions, with just one action button to shoot the many aliens spawning on the screen. You have limited ammo, and you have to reload by shooting the MIB icon when it appears. There are also frequent gun power-ups, one of which seems to do the same amount of damage, but it makes a different sound. But at least there's one other weapon that is more powerful. There are also occasional health refill items that you can shoot to refill your health, and you have a handful of lives. But honestly, it's pretty hard to die in this game. There are 8 levels in total, and while the core gameplay is kind of fun to just blast away, the sheer lack of difficulty makes this tedious to get through a playthrough, and it takes about 20 minutes or so. But at least it has an exploding alien animation sequence. And this also got a standalone handheld with identical gameplay as part of Tiger's Grip game series, which looks like little blasters with triggers and everything. Next up, we go back into the fighting arena for a couple of Mortal Kombat games. Mortal Kombat 3 follows a similar formula to Toshinden, as a 1v1 fighter with 8 characters to pick from, including Sindel, Sonya, Shiva, Liu Kang, and Kano, Sector, Jax, and Sub-Zero. Again, with little details in the graphics to differentiate each, like Shiva's extra set of arms. Now to beat the game, you must win 4 matches, best of 3 rounds for each. You can punch, kick, jump, and execute a special move, which is typically a projectile attack, with the exception of Shiva, who can pick up her opponents and toss them. There are even fatalities, sort of. When you see finish him on the screen at the end of a round, if you do your special move, it will turn your foe into a pile of ashes. All in all, it's pretty silly, but honestly, it's a little more interesting to play than Toshinden was, as you've got slightly more responsive controls here, and the little extra details are a nice touch. Even the stage backgrounds change slightly amongst the matches. Now, I'm not sure why this game is tinted slightly yellow on my super screen. There wasn't a color slide or anything on this one. Maybe someone spilled Tang all over this cartridge or something. The R-Zone also received a Mortal Kombat Trilogy game, which plays very similarly to MK3, but with a different roster. 7 characters this time around, with Sector, Ermac, Cyrax, Sub-Zero, Kitana, Sonya, and Mileena. Controls are also a little different, with the 4 face buttons used for low kick, low punch, and high punch. And you have special moves again as well, and again, they are usually projectiles or some kind of long-range attack. You'll just need to check the manual or figure out the right buttons to press for each. And once again, special moves will also act as fatalities for the end of each round. Kintaro and Shao Kahn are also here as unplayable opponents near the end of the game. All in all, this one is a bit redundant when Mortal Kombat 3 already exists, but it's still pretty fun anyways. But again, this could have been a lot more fun with 2 players, if only the system were capable. Now this next one I sadly couldn't snag a copy of, Sega's Nights into Dreams. While I was hunting R-Zone stuff on eBay, my only shot at getting this one was bundled in a sealed headset as a pack-in game, and the auction went way over my budget, sadly. Now there is a standalone Tiger handheld for this as well. It's not as rare, but still pretty pricey, and I have to guess the gameplay is the same, as I couldn't find any existing footage of the R-Zone version. But we have another Sega classic here and a rare find on the R-Zone, and I did manage to get my hands on Panzer Dragoon, freeing this one from its sealed blister pack prison. In an attempt to emulate the original on the Sega Saturn, It's an on-rail shooter where you take the perspective from behind your dragon as you continuously fly forward, and you have a crosshair on your screen to move around and shoot missiles or lasers at the various bugs, tanks, and dragons that pop up. Now, the difference between missiles and lasers is a mystery to me, but the manual has different buttons for both listed. But hey, at least we got a bangin' soundtrack. Oh man, this loop gets old quick. And another interesting mechanic here is the ability to look in different directions, on the sides or behind you. I'm not sure if this is really required to beat the game or not, but I found that looking in other directions tended to make different enemies appear, usually ones worth more points. And if you're constantly just looking straight forward, there can be long stretches of no action at all, so I guess you might as well look around and rack up a better score. There are 3 difficulty settings and 5 stages, with bosses at the end of each, and you do have a health bar to keep in mind as some of the enemies will fire projectiles at you that are kinda hard to see with all the different background elements continuously moving around. It's not saying much, but this might be one of the more unique and playable games in the R-Zone library that had some ambition to it regarding the on-rails aspect of the original. It's still gonna be a bit repetitive and fairly easy though, but at least a cool oddity in the Panzer Dragoon series. It's also got a standalone LCD handheld as part of the Sega Pocket Arcade line, with essentially the same gameplay. And up next is another fighting game with Primal Rage, Midway's violent prehistoric 1v1 fighter, here with 6 different selectable characters, 3 per each side, and again it's interesting to see how they portray all of these, with such limited space for graphical elements to tell them apart. This one plays pretty much like Mortal Kombat, but no digitized sounds, and some pretty rough looping music the whole time. The AI is exceptionally stupid, with some slight variations per character, but dodging their projectile special moves and counterattacking usually does the trick. The game progression involves beating all 3 characters on the opposing side, and then facing Armadon as a special boss, and then a survival round against all 3 opponents again with 1 health bar. Now at least this does have the little human followers on the ground, which you can eat for more health, a nice little detail added here. Also notable in the footage, this cart has some kind of moisture damage thing going on inside the little clear window, which has me quite curious about how to actually clean these games, or if something like this sets in, I wonder if it's beyond hope or not. At least it still works though. And here we have Road Rash 3, tying in with the 1995 Sega Genesis motorcycle racer. Road Rash's violent streak carried over to the R-Zone as well, as you compete in races with minimal rules and can punch and kick your opponents to the curb as you cruise past them. This version goes deeper than expected as well, by also including a highly unintuitive bike shop menu, where you can use your money to upgrade parts of your bike and maybe even buy a new bike, but honestly I have yet to win a race. You definitely aren't fast enough to win without spending some money right away, and even then it's still pretty tough. I couldn't find a manual for this one online, so maybe I'm missing something here, and I may just need to spend more time on it to figure out a path forward. The controls feel a bit laggy, and it's quite easy to crash into other bikers or the frequent oncoming traffic. To its credit, I do appreciate the ambition and difficulty though. I'd rather have that than to simply beat it within the first 15 minutes of playing. Weirdly enough, this also got a Grip Games variant, like the previously mentioned Men in Black, but the form factor doesn't make much logical sense here, frankly. Maybe they had a surplus of units shaped like this or something. Now we can finally enter the R-Zone in a galaxy far, far away, as we have a string of Star Wars licensed titles to dig into, the most frequently appearing franchise in the R-Zone library with 4 games total. And this one is Imperial Assault, which actually has you assuming the role of Darth Vader according to the manual, and Emperor Palpatine has instructed you to crush the rebellion and destroy all of their leaders from the cockpit of your trusty TIE fighter. I I gotta say, the manuals really do add a lot to the experience, as obviously your imagination has to do a lot of the heavy lifting with this stuff. Anyways, it's a pretty straightforward crosshair controlling gallery shooter, but you do have to time your shots properly, as your lasers take some time to reach their destination. Think of the classic Missile Command game, but without the proper geometry. This one gets quite frantic and difficult, with 4 stages, each with a boss, including Princess Leia in her Corellian cruiser, an escaping rebel transport ship, the Millennium Falcon, or even Luke Skywalker in his X-Wing during his attempt to destroy the Death Star. So I do have the normal handheld for this one too, and it plays the same. But it is notable for having a detachable Darth Vader joystick, which, as you can guess, since it's detachable, it's missing. On the opposite side of the court here, we have Jedi Adventure, which was also a frequent pack-in title with Our hardware, and seems to be one of the more common games floating around on eBay, and luckily one of the better games for the system overall. You control Luke on a mission to rescue Han Solo on Jabba's sail barge. You basically move forward in an open field, and can also shift to upper and lower areas of the screen, and must constantly blast away enemies coming at you from all angles. You can shoot forwards and behind you, and can pick up these little power converter Rebel Alliance logos for more health, and even pick up a lightsaber, which technically doesn't seem more effective or anything, but it does make a sick lightsaber noise. You also have a button to summon Leia, Chewie, or Han for help, but honestly I can't figure out what they actually do in the brief moment that they appear on the screen. There are 5 stages total, and you have 3 lives per stage, and this was pretty easy to beat, but weirdly fun anyway. On my second time playing through this, I did finally notice you can get more points by shooting some of the junk that enemies drop when they die. So I guess you could push this into some score attack territory or something if you really wanted to. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this might technically be the only R-Zone exclusive game in the library, as I couldn't find any trace of a standalone handheld for this one. It took me a little bit of time to realize, however, this is basically exactly the same game as Tiger's Skeleton Warriors handheld, just with different art. You gotta at least give Tiger some credit for squeezing every drop of money they can out of previously completed work. Moving on, we'll step into Han Solo's shoes now, with Millennium Falcon Challenge, notably having the first actual Star Wars-like music. As you can probably guess, you control the Millennium Falcon, and must pilot through asteroid fields and blast away hordes of TIE fighters. If we're comparing it to Imperial Assault, moving around on the screen is the biggest difference here, along with the snappiness of the combat. This one plays surprisingly fast, dare I say almost looks animated at times, especially when you're going full speed. This also leads us to pretty harsh difficulty, and not the fun kind, more like the what the hell just killed me kind. Now it has 4 stages, 3 lives per stage, and the final level has you clearing the way for Luke while he tries to take out the Death Star. Now, this one might be cool if you can figure out how to get good at it. I do have to complain about the included color slide. I actually bought this one sealed to get one, and all it is a pink box in the corner where your health bar is. Nice. Honestly, you might want to get the way cooler standalone handheld on this one. It's literally a Millennium Falcon. And finally, we have Rebel Forces, a gallery shooter under the guise of a Rebel Alliance battle training simulator, where you need to maintain a certain level of shot accuracy and health in order to progress through the game's 5 stages. This one is super similar to the previously reviewed Area 51. You shoot bad guys, don't shoot the good guys, sometimes you get a gun power-up or something, and don't forget to reload. It's simple and it's clearly rehashed, but still kind of fun. This genre really isn't a bad fit for this format. And it does get undeniably challenging and frantic later in the game. And you lose an entire life for shooting an innocent, so you'll need to learn how to differentiate them pretty quickly. And this also received a standalone handheld with a little light gun blaster, all encased in a sweet Darth Vader helmet. And there's one more gallery shooter on the console up next here with Virtua Cop, another Sega hit arcade game converted for the R-Zone and a standalone light gun handheld. It's maybe shocking, but again, this is basically the same as Area 51 and Rebel Forces, just with different artwork and whatnot. If there were any subtle differences between these three games that's worth mentioning, it's mostly just the difference of enemy patterns and learning how to move your crosshair around the screen to different zones. If anything, Virtua Cop has the most intuitive movement of your crosshair, as the direction you hit on your D-pad is usually going to head for the spot you want to get to. So again, this one's fine, it's pretty fun, but the light gun version's probably cooler. Sega's Virtua Fighter franchise also entered the R-Zone with 2 installments of their classic 1v1 fighting game series. Now maybe I'm running out of steam here at the end of this video, but man, some of these games are really starting to feel like the same thing, but with different brands slapped onto it. I guess the main difference here from the other R-Zone fighters is the controls, as I found this to be the most responsive feeling fighter on the system, with your attacks and movements happening pretty quickly after a button input. That being said, that doesn't mean your attacks will always work. Alas, you can still just usually kick your opponents in the crotch repeatedly until you win, just like real life. Also weirdly, I could not get this game to work on the Super Screen. I even had 2 copies of this, and neither one would boot up, but it does work fine on the headset or the XPG. There was also a Virtua Fighter 2 released. Now this one did work on the Super Screen, as you can see, and it also had a color background slide of the fighting arena. Again, you can usually cheese kick to the end here, but there were some new things in the mix. You can throw your opponents and even do a ground attack while they are prone on the ground for tons of damage, and potentially even ring them out. It also features 5 different difficulty settings, and the hardest mode is pretty insane actually. I'm slightly curious to make an effort into figuring out how to win that sometime. And last and sort of least, we have VR Troopers, which I sadly don't have. Now there is some footage of this one on YouTube floating around, and it looks an awful lot like Jedi Adventure, but with more punching and kicking. And before we wrap up, there were a few games that were ultimately cancelled from the R-Zone's lineup, likely when Tiger decided to discontinue the console's production. We could have had a Bug's Life, Alien vs. Predator, Godzilla, Sonic R, and Star Trek. And on top of those, there are a couple of unconfirmed and rumored R-Zone titles for NASCAR racing and Waterworld. So in the end, diving into the R-Zone was quite the experience for me. While I do have a soft spot for old Tiger handhelds and their visceral simplicity, the shortcomings of the hardware are basically illuminated and compounded here. And playing 21 of the games in a short amount of time really reinforced the notion of Tiger recycling their gameplay ideas, just with different licensed properties. But I can still appreciate their ambition to try something new, even if the idea was kinda misguided. And it makes for a great window into gaming trends in the mid-90s. Tiger's ambition would not stop there either, as they discontinued the R-Zone in favor of another stab at the console market with the infamous Gamecom. But that might be something for another video someday, maybe. Let me know in the comments if you think that's a good idea. Also, if you happen to want to see all the raw footage of these R-Zone games, I'll be posting up all of it on my second channel. A link will be in the description. In the meantime, I've covered some actually good handheld games too. Check out my Game Boy horror game videos next.